Hi. It's so good to be here. I was here last summer on, I think, what was the hottest day on record ever in New York City. And I called Cal and said, can we tour the Center for Fiction? Because I wanted to get in out of the heat. And I just have to say, that was a really special day. Noreen was here and took me on this amazing tour. And I ended up writing a piece about it. And the thing that I learned that I didn't know was that when this was founded as the Mercantile Library, it was founded because the clerks who worked for the merchants were drinking and like going to billiard rooms and getting into a lot of trouble, and they wanted to give them a place to go to educate themselves. And so but they told them they couldn't read fiction, which is so ironic because this is the Center for Fiction. They were only allowed to read nonfiction. Fiction was considered romance and improper. And they rioted for the right to read fiction. And then the board changed the rules. And so I just think it's a good reminder to all of us who write fiction that once upon a time, people had to riot for the right to read fiction. And also I want to say, I'm talking way too much before I read, but this is a really special reading for me because my dream team is here. So Cal, Noreen, but then I've got my agent, Anna Stein, here. I've got my editor, Elizabeth Schmidt's here. In fact, walking here together, the three of us, someone said, hey, Charlie's Angels. Charlie's Angels. No Charlie. But anyhow, and I've got my publicist, John Mark, here. I think Deb, my other publicist, Deb Seeger, is here. I mean, literally everyone who's had a hand in this book is here. I have my blurbers here. I have David Means here, and his wife Geneva here, and Jill McCorkle is my blurber. And who else am I missing? And my friend Tim Liu, great poet. So, and Jessica Monahan, who works for Elizabeth. Anyways, thank you guys for being here. Half this room are people who have supported this book from the get-go. I'm just going to be very short, 2 flash pieces from the collection, and turn it over to Ms. Jill. The first one's called Imperfections. I want you to meet my wife, he said. We need to tether this, whatever this is, to the space-time continuum. I saw their dog first, a yellow lab mint-stepping from the hatchback, each paw shaking on the upstep, old. His wife emerged from the driver's side and kicked off her flip-flops. He doesn't do well on long drives, she said, smiling. But when I reached out to shake her hand, she was already turning back to the car, gathering trash. I scratched the dog's head while he peed on the curb. The man looked at me. I was going to sign your copy, he said. So I invited him and his wife to come up to the now empty hotel room where one of his lithographs was packed in my bag. His wife said, I'd better stay with Hank. And then I said the important thing, the thing I hope he remembers. Oh, then I'll just go grab it. No, he said, I'll come up with you. And barely out of her sight, the man put his arm around my waist, whispered, you're perfect, took my hand and pulled me upstairs where my luggage sat just inside the door. And what I want to say here is that he threw me onto the mattress. But the truth is, I sat stiffly on its edge while he signed the print, then handed it to me. All the things I can't say he'd written. And then he was not cupping, not cradling, but palming my cheeks, hands flat, like he was about to pray. I closed my eyes. After 17 years of marriage, I thought, someone else is going to, but he kissed my forehead, a long press, 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, until I said too loud, go be with your wife, because it was the only thing to say, and his lips were that close. And somewhere a voice said, Joseph and Potiphar's wife, flee. The kiss made my right eye burn. After he left, I flushed it with cold water, but the burning grew unbearable, so that during the 2-hour shuttle ride to the airport, I had to keep both eyes closed. Like he put a seal on my forehead, I wrote to him later, and hot wax dripped down into my eye. I kept rubbing it, kept pressing my face hard into the back seat window, my headphones on, listening to the playlist he'd made for me the night before while we sat on his bed with our laptops open and saw pictures of his wife, their trip to Prague, Hank jumping off a diving board, pictures of my husband's birthday, the boys spray painting the number 40 on the garage door, the girls giving him the 40 Reasons We Love You poster they'd made. What we were saying, without saying it, here's why this can't happen. What we would keep saying during the following months of just one last breath before we hang up, Let me hear you say my name, your name, any name. Won't you please send me a picture of your foot, breast, ear, some part of you so long as it's you? And when I said, well, but there are freckles, plus this funky trilobite mole just above my navel, he said, another thing I hope he remembers, but it's your imperfections I want to fuck. And take a drink on that note. Relatives of God. The day I released you, summer in Minnesota, late afternoon. I was in Walmart, standing in front of Granny Smith's, Pink Ladies, John Gold's. My husband was in another aisle, picking out steaks. And I was thinking how this small town lacked progress, needed to get with the times, leave off genetic modification and crop dusting, and join the renewable, sustainable movement like the rest of the country. And I remembered a moment 3 years earlier, back home in Tennessee, when you and I were still in love. I was shopping in one of those organic markets and had you on the phone. It was like that, wasn't it? Had you. And in the produce department, I said, best thing about fall, the Honeycrisp. And you said, I adore the Honeycrisp. And in the silence that followed, there was between us, what else to call it, something like joy. Later that day, my husband at work and the children in school, you listened while I brought myself to orgasm. It was the first time you were just a listener. When I cried out your childhood nickname, the one you told me your little sister used, you said, don't ever call me anything else. It was the day my husband and I had argued about 69. I said I'd never liked it, that the simultaneous giving and receiving diluted the pleasure of both. After we ate our Minnesota dinner, my husband and I took the children to Crescent Beach. We stood in the sand, watching the four of them slip around on the rock jetty, the setting sun turning the water a violent orange pink. Our older son hopped from rock to rock, pulling off his shirt and shallow diving into the lake, his boxers visible above the waistline of his Madras shorts. His younger brother followed, cautious, all elbows and shoulder blades. The two girls sat at a safe distance from the water. We could hear the older sister talking the younger one out of jumping in. White t-shirt, she said, and the younger one nodded, grave, though her chest was still like a boy's. My husband took my hand. Look what we made, he said. We are relatives of God. But I was picturing the children walking down the jetty and into the lake, one by one, oldest to youngest, the water closing over their heads. I was thinking how they would eventually disappear, how I would become resigned to their departure after years of hating the planet for spinning them away and leaving us more alone than we were before. I was thinking of Eve and her apple, or whatever kind of fruit it was, how she was driven by delight to share the taste with the one she loved, and it ruined them both. But God, knowing this in advance, loved them anyhow. And I knew then that I could forgive the boy and the girl on the phone 3 years earlier, the girl in the produce department holding an apple saying, I think you would love this, the boy saying, darling, I already do. My husband put his arm around my waist. We watched our children. Our children, in glances, watched us.
It's great to be here, great to share the stage with Jamie. I too have many people in the audience that I'm glad are here with me tonight. Thank you. I'm reading from my novel, Life After Life, and it's a novel that's made up of a lot of different voices, people coming together at various times, and several of the characters live in an assisted living. And you're going to hear just briefly the introduction from two of these voices. The first is Rachel. Rachel Silverman is in the South. God only knows what she was thinking, and yet she thought it, and she chose it, and now she's here in the middle of nowhere, the land of quilts and doilies, yes ma'am, and no sir. please and thank you, hot as hell, and surrounded by some sweet tea soaked idiots should just as soon slap and let us listen to. So she's here, as the big X on the map in the front hall tells her. She is here, Pine Haven Estates, Retirement Village and Assisted Living, Fulton, North Carolina, an hour from the ocean and minutes from Interstate 95, just 700 miles from where she spent her whole life in Massachusetts, which was also just an hour from the ocean and minutes from the same highway. She is here, her last adventure. She's come to see the hometown of her one great love, a man who was not her husband and who likely never would have been. She had 3 glorious months with him in the summer of 1970, which was the year she turned 39. Imagine turning 39 at a time when people still made reference to Jack Benny and found humor in a person never admitting he had turned 40. Now you'd be hard-pressed to find a young person who had ever even heard of Jack Benny. And now 39 sounds like someone barely living, still wet behind the ears, their muscles capable of doing all kinds of things they take for granted. They met during one wonderful summer on the Cape, both there alone, and then after that there were occasional afternoons and odd Saturday mornings, some stretches of time more generous in giving than others, until the winter of 1976 when he was out of her life forever. And now she has come seeking his South, the place of his boyhood, the setting of all those stories he told her when they burrowed into the far back booth of a Duxbury deli or some small motel down on the Cape. That life was complicated and fraught. That life left her heart pounding and her sleep fitful, so afraid she might be called, afraid she might speak his name in the darkness of the bed where her husband of so many years lay. That life involved long days at work where she was a lawyer, one of a handful of women in her firm, and therefore needing to prove her value twice as hard as the men around her. That life involved dark winter days and snow shovels and raw hands and dry skin. And it involved those secret meetings, brandy-laced and delicious, the smell of wet wool and diesel fumes when standing and waiting for the train, suddenly intoxicating. Anticipation and deceit, lovemaking and lies, cases and stuffed files, and somewhere in there a uterus that needed to be pulled out and tossed away, and the years of debating about adopting or not came and went. One day an obsession and the next a distant memory. Just before she migrated south, she had a taxi drive her back to that old apartment, and she stood on the icy sidewalk staring up at the library window. They had not lived there in years, and she felt a wave of time sickness to see it. Years of lost hope seeped into the cold red brick. She could almost hear their voices, her husband's, her own, the heavy black wall phone in the kitchen, the radio on top of the refrigerator, always turned to public radio, rattles in the windows and rainbows cast by the warped, bubbled glass of the panes. When she got back into the cab, she felt she was saying goodbye to something living and breathing, a life that would continue to exist, one that she could reach back and touch if brave enough to do so. But now life is simple. Now life is about coffee in the morning. Life is about meals and books and memories and the occasional television show she doesn't enjoy that much and yet finds herself drawn to all the same. She does not give a damn about who can dance and who can't, and she doesn't recognize a soul they say is a celebrity except, of course, Cloris Leachman, who Rachel saw in South Pacific on Broadway in 1954. Next voice, just a brief introduction to one of the younger members of this retirement facility. She's a retired high school teacher on a bit of a rant in this section. I was a good teacher for 40 years, and everything was normal. Then next thing I knew, the children were coming in with names like Bandana and Eurasia and Montpelier. And I said, those are things and places, children, and you are people. What on earth is going on? And there were names I couldn't even pronounce. And I can guarantee you that you don't readily go calling names you can't say. I'm looking for the Johns and Bills and Toms, and they just weren't there anymore. I mean, I'm a human, I'm a woman. I was an English teacher and a bit of an amateur writer myself. But I'll tell you, things went so far off course, I just didn't even know where I was anymore. I think it was the beginning of the end, too. What once was generous compassion for high school students with all their angst and crap going on turned into purity, agitation, and fury. I didn't get frustrated by who I am. I got frustrated by what they were reading and wanting to write about. I said, you're too smart for all this shit. Dwarves and wizards and gnomes and vampires, big blue aliens with tails like monkeys. I said, what I wouldn't give for a good old-fashioned story about somebody losing his or her virginity or getting an abortion. Grandma died, and for the first time I knew I was mortal. Or what about the one where the boy doesn't want to kill a deer, but Granddaddy makes him so he can be a man? I was wanting to write something myself, and it was dying to get out of my head. But couldn't find the door. It was also plugged up with all that malarkey. I had worked so hard, and all I was longing for was some whining little boy who didn't want to kill a deer. I was craving one, in fact, and would have loved him and given him an instant A. And where did all the orphans go? Jane and Oliver and Pip? It's an honorable and very dramatic position. And the girl who's upset to have a period, where did she go? Or the one all torn up about losing her virginity, where did she go? If they're still out there, they're keeping a low profile and hiding from all those getting boobs for Christmas and graduation and making themselves up to look 30. I wanted dead deers and dead grandparents and busted condoms. I wanted anything other than a zombie or a shape-shifting demon wolf coyote. What am I to do with a bunch of aliens at Armageddon? Some of them said about their papers, I meant to be vague, like that might excuse something that didn't make a goddamn bit of sense. Or the one who said I just didn't get what he was doing because it's so brilliant. I took my work seriously, and where did it get me? There I was asking for a little reality, and who wouldn't be after Columbine? What teacher on the planet after Virginia Tech didn't study her classroom windows and doors and the desk arrangements and hatch some plan for how she would protect all those young bodies, even the ones that got on her last goddamn nerve? And then this one boy meaning to push my button, this one boy named something like Montreal Fedora, some literary criticism on the death of Julius Caesar. He said, and I quote, them dudes was mean as shit, weren't they? And I said, those dudes were mean as shit. That is what I got in trouble for. Some kid in there ran home and tattled, not about what was being discussed in class, but that the teacher said shit. Miss Tyler, come to the office. Miss Tyler, please come to the office. This had happened many times. I made a notch on my desk, in fact, every time it happened, and one whole side looked like a fine-tooth comb. My principal was about 14 and had never read Shakespeare. How do I know? I asked him one day. In that moment when I needed him on my side, I almost wished that I had not done that, or that I had been a teacher who did not argue against prayer in my class, which I had done for years, or did not allow hats. But what in the hell did I care if they wore hats? Some of them might have been sporting bad haircuts they were ashamed of, or keeping their lice locked in. What did I care? I didn't tell on kids who refused to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance either. I figured we'd have plenty of battles to fight, and I needed to choose the most important. I mean, these are humans growing up and witnessing the uterus as a competitive sporting arena. Who would have ever thought that? Irresponsible birth control will get you a TV show and a magazine cover. Octo, sexto, moron. I said to my principal, the boy king, I asked, if I retire like you say I have to, who will teach these children? Who will guard the gate? Who can promise me they'll tell the boys to keep their trousers zipped and tell the girls not to go promising things they do not intend to deliver? Who will teach birth control? Who will teach the value of literature? I said, who will tell them? Nobody gives a shit about how dwarves and trolls have sex. If they had, the Brothers Grimm would have figured it out and already done it. They had every opportunity. what I wouldn't have given for a stained soul. Just one good story about a stained soul.